Welcome to Conversations on Healing and Growth. I'm Ben Umstead.
And I'm Martin Perkins. We've titled today's episode Odds and Sods. It's a variant of odds and ends. It's a reference to things that, on some level, that are not part of a complete set. They're important to us because we want to share them. It made me think a little bit as we were approaching this. It has a musical reference point. I think I know the term odds and sods because I'm a Who fan, and there was a Who album titled Odds and Sods, which was outtakes of theirs. But of even greater importance or significance was the idea of what the Beatles did on the B-side of Abbey Road, where they took all these musical ideas that didn't really add up to a whole song, but at the same time all fit together, right? It's a funny thing where things can feel simultaneously like they're just fragments, but at the same time when you put them all together, it feels somehow complete. So that's what today's episode is about. It's about bits and pieces that matter to us and hopefully as a whole come together and feel like that for you, our listening audience.
And so one thing that we're going to do with these is bring them back to other episodes. So it's all connected to, the conversations that we really enjoy having with each other, the topics, the ideas, the parts of the world that we love to explore on the show. The first one that we'd like to offer you is actually related to an Instagram post, Martin, that you did on July 30th, right? July 30th of this year was Earth Overshoot Day. Now, the best way to explain this is just to read what we shared on Instagram on July 30th. So 7 months into the year, July 30th, 2026, humanity will have used up everything Earth's ecosystems can regenerate in 12 months. So everything after the date, July 30th, 2026, is drawn from a balance that we cannot repay. This year marks the highest level of ecological overshoot ever recorded. As such, it is time to make different, more sustainable choices. Not tomorrow, now. So why does this matter, Martin?
So the conversation about the environment is often focused on climate changes, how it's impacting us. Another conversation I'm very familiar with is the role that pollinators play in our lives and the concern that wild bees as well as honeybees, as well as various types of butterflies, are threatened because of the choices we're making. So that's where our environmental focus often lies. We don't often focus that much on the fact that here in the Western world, and really a lot of parts of the world, there's a culture of brand new, right? We want to buy new things. It's an expression of our worth. It's an expression of our hard work. It's an expression of that we're important, that we matter, right? And the truth is, if more and more people need something brand new, we as a race of people were screwed. There is a degree of hypocrisy in that statement, because here I am in my home in Maryland in the United States saying, stop buying new stuff. And for the person or people who this might actually be new for, being able to have the resources to buy new in some parts of the world, we're saying to them, oh, you can't buy new. Well, the truth is, the people to whom this hypocrisy would be most clear are the very people who know how important it really is. Because they've been living in a world that we used to really live in, where toasters got fixed, washers and dryers got fixed, right? We didn't just throw something away because it stopped working. And now it's just easier to buy it new. with the new warranty. And yet I have a friend. He runs a small chain of automotive shops. And his philosophy is that, contrary to popular belief, we can keep cars going in new like repair and save a lot of money. Because each time you buy a new car, right, all that money could easily, at a fraction of the cost, be thrown into the car that you're currently driving if you've been keeping up with your repairs. And you've got a car that you're familiar with, that's well maintained, and can last. I have a dear friend who shared with me yesterday that, she's got 330,000 miles on her truck. And for her, it's like, well, I'm just going to keep running it and keep repairing it. What she did decide recently to do, because like my truck and her truck, they don't get very good gas mileage, so she recently bought a used Toyota sedan for longer trips and for the frequent trips where she doesn't need her truck. These are the kinds of decisions that we are beginning to see needing to be made. Another example that I've seen in the world that I read about recently was the great increase in the number of people who are not going out and buying new houses, but instead, well into their mid-30s, are choosing to stay at home with their parents, right? Now, some people would say, oh, that's a problem for the economy, or that's a symptom of a problem with the economy. Well, maybe. Or maybe it's a symptom of people seeking family and community as a priority over just buying new. I'm going to get the new house. Over the weekend, I was helping my nephew at his home. A friend of his came over, and this friend lives about 45 minutes away, and he lives alone. And as we got to talking, it was very clear that living alone with he and his cat is a lonely existence. He hungers for more connection. And the truth was, he came down and he helped a little bit on the project we were working on. But a lot of the time he was just DJing the music. And he did help in other ways. I'm not trying to diminish his impact. I'm trying to make the point that he came down because he was seeking connection. The truth is, the more we allow ourselves these opportunities to repair, to regeneratively connect with the world around us, the more connections we make with the world and with ourselves. And it might seem like a loose connection, but the kind of economy that we have right now of new, always making decisions based on economic benefit is unsustainable. We can't continue this way and expect to have a world that is worth living in for our children's children's children.
Indeed. If you all want to dive deeper into some of these aspects, we have past episodes that touch upon some of this stuff and some related topics that are pretty cool. We've got our 2-part series on what we called egalitarian regeneration. Can egalitarian regeneration save humanity from itself? And this really speaks to regenerating a creative spirit and creative ways to use resources within the community, not extracting them from the community. And this takes us to part 2 of that series. What matters today? Communities or the shareholder? Because of course the shareholder looks at it as a for-profit venture, as a wealth gathering and wealth hoarding endeavor. And then finally, we also have another episode called Can Sharing Illuminate Our Path? And this really speaks to what you've been sharing, Martin, around just creative ways to engage with the moment, whether it's a 35-year-old making the choice to live with their parents, not just because there's an economic benefit to that, but because there is a communal benefit to that. The next, and I love to say odds and sods with that Z, with almost this like punk rock, do-it-yourself zine quality, odds and sods. And that DIY speaks to this sense of how being slow and steady with one's creative process is really important to our wisdom, our imagination, that dance that we cultivate within ourselves, because we live in a culture where results are often seen through immediacy. It's got to be as soon as possible. End of the day used to be a pretty immediate sense of things, right? But now it's like 30 seconds. You got to have it. And in that sense, it's almost like pulling the lever on a jackpot machine.
And that jackpot machine, so they're referred to as one-armed bandits.
One-armed bandits. Ooh. Grim and dark and hilarious all at the same time. But that really speaks to our desire for connecting visibility to success. And, I want to speak to Steve Way, the actor and producer who many of you may know from the TV show Rami on Hulu. He has muscular dystrophy, and he's an advocate for more people with visible and non-visible disabilities to be on television and movies. And he wrote about this notion of visibility equaling success. And as somebody who is visibly disabled and speaks from this incredibly authentic, deep place, he said, it's not really the case. Visibility has become this cultural cachet that sometimes translates into money. But creative success or success for the community that you're a part of, something that's sustainable, he said, visibility doesn't really connect this. And this gets into the core of being slow and steady with your creative process. If you're loving the activity that you're doing, well, it's the thing. If you're focused on the money of it all, right? The enjoyment comes not even second. It's probably all the way down at XYZ. And in this sense, what we put out into the world, we receive in kind. So if we want money, then we've bought in to the money story. Gimme, gimme, gimme. But when you're doing something that you love to do, financial results will come along in some way. It'll come more slowly because the focus of what you're doing, how you're doing it, isn't on the money. And this is really how we build deeply meaningful and sustainable relationships with the things that we do, but also the people that we're around and the people that we are advocating for, to get back to Steve's point about visibility and that visibility equals success in some kind of measure. Because we are in a moment where people with disabilities are more visible in society. They have a greater voice, and at the same time, their rights are being threatened. So I think this is something that's really important, because art and creativity and activism and direct action is something that over the last quarter century, half century, maybe even the whole century has been so potent and so powerful. And there's certain people that really tap into that wonderful soup of all of these things, right, Martin?
I think what you're really building into as a concept for our sharing today is where we put our energy is where we get our results. So in our recent Why Work episode, we talked a great deal about how important the joy and the intent we had around creation was so primary for us in creating this podcast. And there's a really lovely example of this in the world, and happens to be here local, which is Dischord Records. Dischord Records was created in the early 80s by a pair of punk rockers. The one most known to most people was Ian MacKaye of Minor Threat and Fugazi fame. They basically created their own label, Dischord Records, and it's still there today. And they're doing it in very simple ways. They employ a small group of people. They love what they're doing. There's a sense of community to what they're doing. And while it's true that any endeavor can have its heaviness or its cumbersome nature, no matter why we're doing it, but what we're really trying to acknowledge here is that when we feel that way, more often than not, it's really not about what we're doing. And it's really about ourselves. So the thing that people often say, well, at least I got a lot of money out of it. But the truth of the matter is, if you focus on what's really at the core of this, then you're framing your life around growth. And you're not framing it around strictly the acquisition of wealth. On a completely side note to a side note, right? An odds and sod to another odds and sods. I've never really, and this will sound really strange to a lot of people, but I've never really understood the concept of retirement. I can remember as a little boy, people saying to me, what don't you understand about retirement? You work your whole life. Why wouldn't you want to retire? Because why would I stop doing things that I enjoy? And they say, well, because a lot of your work won't be doing things you enjoy doing. And I'm like, well, then why would I do them? I couldn't get my mind around this convoluted notion of spending decades doing work you didn't enjoy doing. Never made sense to me. Because in my life model, there isn't a retirement. My work pace today at age 64 is largely what it was when I was 44 or 34. If anything, as a result of the ease with which I've chosen to live my life over the last several decades here at 64, I feel as good at age 64 as I did when I was 34. Now, I can't do some of the physically demanding things that I could do when I was 34, and I certainly can't do them as quickly as I once did them. But there's really very little that I can't do at my own pace. And most importantly, I can do them, and I've learned to do them through great practice. I've learned to do them with great enjoyment, such that I don't really want to stop doing what I'm doing. So this notion of retirement is just like, pardon my French, but what the fuck? So some people will say, well, I need a new chapter. I get the new chapter. I want to slow down my pace. But the notion of the word itself, retirement, stepping back from life, and the whole model of retirement that's been developed here in this country, where we segregate our older people. So now they're in senior communities. They're in senior homes. And the whole economic model makes it untenable for them to stay with family because the model doesn't allow for that. It's more efficient. There's also the idea that by putting senior people together, you create community. What if those people didn't need to go and hang out with seniors because they were already connected to their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, and other people their age or of other ages? Why does there need to be so much age segregation?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's certainly made it interesting for me to exist, to be how I am in the world, because I'm so at ease within any age group. And sometimes, not always, I do realize that that's a bit of an anomaly. One thing, though, that you touched upon around retirement, I want to note, there's also the idea around success in retirement. I can afford to retire. And some people cannot, right? So there is this, we can afford to retire. We can go on these trips. We can live in these luxury condos with other seniors, yada, yada, yada.
It's a classist view.
Yeah.
I'm revealing my democratic socialist leanings, but it should be available to many, many people, and it should be available in a way that's sustainable for all of us. Right? And I'm not saying everyone should be able to afford luxury trips around the world, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't do that. You want to travel and see the world? Amen.
But it's about access to wanting a next chapter, a different chapter, right? Or even to set down a book and pick up another one and write a different part of your journey. In this sense, if you'd like to dive deeper into some of the feathers we're ruffling, there's no better place to start than our recent episode of Why Work. Here, we continue to question the value and validity of work, of how we work, like we're talking about right now, and redefining it. And at the core of this is, how are we being natural? So I'm going to plant that seed again. How are you being natural today, right now, with yourself? There are other episodes that you can explore as well, including revisiting the merry-go-round, where we take a very early episode and kind of reframe it a little bit and add a commentary to it around the notion of the creative muse, the spirit, the creative life force. There's a call to integrity and on being effortless, but I think there's a soft spot for me with this next episode we'd like to turn your attention to. It's Honeydew, a recipe for creativity. Martin, I had a lot of fun doing this one with you because we went and we watched an episode of the television show The Bear that was about one of the characters more deeply learning what he already loved doing, right? As a pastry chef, as a dessert specialist. And you see the creative process throughout the episode. You see how life outside of him being in these restaurants, in these kitchens, inform the restaurant and kitchen experiences. And it's one of my favorites. Reflecting back with you today, it is actually probably a top 5 favorite of what we've done, just because it's so gentle, it's measured. We get to be inspired by other storytellers and reinterpret their work into a different form with the podcast. So do check out Honeydew, a recipe for creativity.
Our next odd and sod. Initially, it's based on a book, Tales from the Loop, that was made into a TV show. The book was Paintings by Simon Stollenhag. And during the pandemic, my daughter Luna and I found the TV show. It has a very nice, in line with what we were just talking about, has a nice slow pace to it, and it creates this very rich world to enter into. It's set in an alternate history where advanced robotics were developed in the 1960s. A mythical scientist develops a nervous system for robots so that they can move about in the world in a very different way. And in this parallel present, humans live beside the remnants of a whole robotic workforce inside a rural, largely derelict industrial zone. And the show is just so rich in its sense of mystery without moving into the realm of horror. On the contrary, there's a sense of wonder. There's a sense of innocence, childlike innocence. And, once I started exploring more about the show, I discovered that the TV show had been developed from a book. And I had seen the images online. And then finally, I believe it was earlier this year for my birthday, my daughter gave me the book.
It's so cool because I haven't seen the show myself, and I've encountered the book. I've encountered Simon's paintings kind of along the way, initially back around 2015, and getting to kind of revisit seeing that stuff with you has been quite fun. One thing that's really cool to note about the world itself is that in this zone, time has become malleable, right? And this is all the result of a machine built to unlock and explore the mysteries of the universe. And this machine is buried deep below what the humans in the zone call the loop. So this world of the loop, the tales from the loop. And this is interesting because the show writes its own stories, has its own characters within the world that Simon Stollenhag began with his paintings and sketches, but also as if he was a denizen in the world himself, writing these little anecdotes and journal entries, these short stories that feel like little scraps of other people's lives that you might find in your own backyard. With this, we wanted to share a little bit from the book, right? Martin, you had highlighted a story that you wanted to read.
Yeah. This is from page 56 of Tales from the Loop by Simon Stollenhag, and it's a short excerpt from something he wrote accompanying one of the images in the book. And it's titled The Escapee. It stood under the oak tree in the yard. An oily, sad little tin can thing. Its head partially entangled in some sort of a canvas cover. It had discovered me and stood perfectly still, its head fixed in my direction. As I approached, it rocked nervously to and fro where it stood. It flinched, rustling its wiring, each time the snow crunched underneath my boots. Soon I was close, so close I could reach the cover hanging from one of its lenses. I leaned forward, managed to get hold of the canvas, and yanked it off. The optics underneath it quickly focused. It was marked FOA on the side, which meant this was an escapee from Munso. Then our front door rattled, and with 3 quick bounds the robot was gone. The door opened, and there, on the steps, stood my father.
That's wonderful. It's so rich in its sense of discovery, and I think also this sense that so many of the paintings offer that childlike innocence that you note, that wonder, and living alongside what we would refer to as machines, soulless beings perhaps, but recognizing them in this environment, in this world from Tales from the Loop as fellow creatures, because they've outlived what they were programmed to do. They live beyond their programming. They live outside the box. The book and the show behave in a way where it drops you in a moment. It's media res. And in many respects, finding art that invites you to dive in and go on an adventure, explore a mystery that may not be solvable is one of the things that we're really asking you to consider today. With episodes that we've done in the past, there's some really cool stuff to explore, including Shadows Fill Time. It was actually our 25th episode in May of 2025. We talked a lot about the transformative impact that an engaged practice and presence has on shaping our sense of time, right? There are other episodes that explore some of these or similar concepts, like the unfolding cycles within cycles, and in many ways. This episode focuses on storytelling as a healing modality and how we can embody our biggest story with authenticity. Of course, Conversations on Healing and Growth itself as a podcast, as a way to create, as a way to share, is an expression of, our big stories, right? And all these little stories we share today, especially with Tales from the Loop, recognizing how art is a part of the practice of healing and growing. Watching and listening, yes, but creating, finding that creative life force within yourself and expressing it.
Thank you to all of our listeners for taking this journey today. And please, if you haven't listened to all of the episodes or any of the episodes that we've discussed, check them out. We'd be honored to have your listenership.
Conversations on Healing and Growth is produced by Ben Umstead and Martin Perkins, with editing and music by Ben Umstead.